Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee workshop, where today we're going to build this Irish hutch. It has a couple doors down below, a couple drawers, a nice serving area, and plenty of open display. Now, it's not an easy project to build, but if you're up to the challenge, it's worth it. And I'll show you how next, right here on the new Yankee workshop.
The new Yankee workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
Isn't this beautiful? Today we're at the Mayacamas Vineyards high up on Mount Vita. And in that shallow volcanic crater are some of the vines that Bob and Noni Trevors grow for their wine. They have a Cabernet, a Chardonnay, a Sauvignon Blanc, among others. They're also collectors of incredible pine antiques. I've been told that this part of the winery used to be the distillery, where wine would be made into brandy. You'd never know that now. A freshly plastered ceiling, nice thick stone walls. Now underneath the wagon wheel light fixture is a table I really like. 10 feet long, made out of pine, plenty of room to seat 8 people. And over against this wall, a very interesting piece made out of oak that comes from Mexico. Underneath the stair is this beautiful antique cherry piano, and I'm told that Bob once in a while will play a tune. But what I wanted you to see was here in the family kitchen. It's a hutch, thought to be Irish and probably well over 200 years old. Has a couple doors down at the bottom with plenty of storage, couple drawers, and I really like the height. It's a little bit higher than the normal hutches that I see. Some decorative wood here for the partition, nice beads on the rails of each shelf, and a little cleat to hold the china for display. Up at the top, a nicely cut out cornice capped off with a molding. We've never built a hutch quite like this. I think it's time we did. Well, I'm getting started this morning working with some of this wonderful antique lumber. Now, when the boards come to me, they look like this. These boards came from a building that was slated for demolition. And rather than end up in the dumpster, they're going to become part of our hutch. Now, last week I built the prototype using the same type of antique boards, and it looks 200 years old as soon as it's finished. Now, I did make some changes to the original, but nothing that's very consequential. If you'd like to build a version of our Irish hutch, a measure drawing is available with a materials list, and you'll hear more about that before this program ends. Now, before we go any further with the power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. For the last few minutes, I've been using my stacked dado head cutter to make dados in those panels. Now, they were all through dados when I built the prototype. A through dado for the top shelf, a through dado for the middle shelf, and I had made a through dado for the bottom shelf. But there's a difference here. The bottom shelf is narrower. And when I assembled the piece, you could see the dado right here. So I had to put in a little Dutchman. But there's a better way, and that's to make what's known as a stop dado. Now, to make a stop dado, the first thing I do is put a pencil line on the saw table that shows me exactly where the dado will start removing material. Now, here's the layout for my dado, and it wants to stop right here, which is 1.25 inches back from the front edge. So I'm going to need another line. I'm going to mark 1.25 inches back, and just use my board as a straight edge, and put another line. Now, when I guide the piece through to make the dado, I want to keep my eye on the back edge. I want to stop right when the back edge meets that first line. All right, now we'll just chisel it square. Now you'll notice that I've installed a sacrificial wood board to my rip fence, and that's so I can use my dado head cutter to form rabbets at the top of the lower panels. Now I'm going to raise the dado head up to 3/8 of an inch. Now that rabbet will conceal the upper boards of the case. Now this 3/8 by 3/8 rabbet will conceal the plywood back of the lower case. Well, now we're ready for a little assembly. And I just want to brush some glue in each dado joint. Bring the pieces together. I'm going to put a clamp on it before I install any nails. Okay, now I want to see if the side is square to the shelf, and it is. And now I'm just going to use my pneumatic nailer and toenail some 4-penny finish nails through the shelf into the side. Now before I put any nails in the middle, you can see that there's a slight bow in the side. And to straighten that, I'm just going to take a heavy piece of wood that's nice and straight and clamp it in place. And that should take care of it. Well, now for the shelf. You'll notice that the shelf and the bottom are made from new pine. And that's because the salvage pine is expensive and it's a very limited resource. And it takes a lot of time to get it into workable condition. So I only use it where it shows. Now I'm standing at the top of the base cabinet, and I'm going to install a 2-inch cleat at the top, which will not only pick up the 1/4-inch plywood back, but it will also be used to attach the counters later. Now this second 2-inch cleat will support the back of the draw support system. Now for the plywood back, a sheet of 1/4-inch Luan set in a bed of glue and attached with some 5/8-inch brads. Now before I start any work on the face frame, I'm installing this temporary spacer to keep the front of the cabinet square. Now the first piece of the face frame is the end stile. And you'll notice that at the top of the end stile there's a rabbet, a stopped rabbet, which will receive a triangular block later. We'll just clamp this piece in position. Now setting the center stile and the rails that go into the drawers is a bit of a juggling act. First I want to slip one end of the rail into the end stile and set it up against the center stile, but hold it away from the whole cabinet until I get the other rail set in position. Okay. Now I should be able to push the whole assembly into place. Great. Now I put some marks on the side of the center stile, and that will show me the height of the shelf, which I can attach with a couple nails. Now along the front edge of the lower shelf, there's a cleat, and that will be used to attach the base and the decorative trim, but it doesn't show in the finished product. Now with the cabinet tipped on its back, I can install the base. I've clamped it in position on the side, and I'm using just some screws driven from the inside of the cabinet, no glue. Where the side of the base meets the front, there is a miter joint. And I'm going to reinforce that joint by using a little bit of glue and a biscuit. Now, I've just made the first pass on a piece of 3/4-inch square stock to make a base molding. And I'm using what the manufacturers refer to as a multi-profile bit. There's coves and quarter rounds and even half rounds. And by raising the bit into different locations, there's an infinite number of moldings you can create. I'm going to make a couple of adjustments and then just round over the bottom of the molding to complete it. For the last few minutes, I've been forming a decorative bead on these thin strips. Look again at the prototype, and you can see where I use these decorative beads. On the drawers, I actually wrap the draw front. On the doors, I wrap the inside of the door opening, and it just gives a very nice detail. The beads are installed using a little bit of glue and a few brads. That fits good. Now, before I nail the bead on the hinge side in place, because my router won't fit up in this corner, I'm going to remove the bead and mortise for the hinge first. First, I score the outline of the hinge. With the two pieces clamped next to one another at the workbench, I'm going to use my router to remove the material. Now just a chisel to clean up the corners. Okay, now let's get to work on the draw support system. Now the first piece is this cleat that gets installed to the back of the rails, 11/16 of an inch down from the top. And now some cross pieces. And on every cross piece, another cleat to guide the side of the draw. Now there's a little thin filler strip on each side of the draw opening to reduce the width. These plywood corner blocks will reinforce the corner and give me a place to attach the top. This center cross piece will also be used to secure the top. What you see here is the top. The bottom side is facing up. It's made up of two boards that were glued together, and I've correctly sized it. Now what I'm doing is applying some 1/2-inch thick bits of wood along the edges to give it the appearance of a 1 1/4-inch thick top. Now here I'm using some thin pieces of end grain, again so that it's the illusion of a 1 1/4-inch thick top. Now with just a dab of glue in the middle and a couple brads, I'm going to install some cleats that'll keep the draws from tipping out too far when they're opened. Now I'm beginning to mill the parts for the doors. All the rails and stiles will get this step, which is to create a groove to hold the panel and a decorative bead. To make that, I'm using one of the bits that comes from a door-making kit. Now I'm going to switch from the pattern bit to the cope bit to mill the ends of the rails. Now that fits beautifully. Now the door panels are 3/8 of an inch thick, but since the groove in the stiles and the rails is only 1/4 of an inch thick, I need a rabbet. These cope joints are so strong because there's so many surfaces for the glue. Now the panel, of course, gets no glue. We'll just slip that into position and then set the rails. Okay, that's nice and square. We'll set it aside to dry and make a drawer. Those dados in the sides of the drawer will receive the back. The drawer fronts and the sides get this groove for the plywood bottom. Now, if I dampen the wood a bit on the prototype drawer, you can see that the side is joined to the front with a dovetail joint. And that's what I've been doing over here at my dovetailing jig. And that's another very strong joint. Now the bottom receives no glue, just some brads along the back. Now here's some more of that decorative bead that I'm using to wrap the drawer front. A couple screws hold the drawer front to the box. Well, a 1/4-inch roundover bit takes care of the edges of the top. Now I'll attach it with a few screws, and I think that's enough for today. Tomorrow we'll work on the up portion of our Irish Hutch. For the last few minutes I've been forming this piece, sort of a shoe or foot that anchors the top of the cabinet to the base. I cut it out on the bandsaw and sanded it smooth, and now I'll attach it to the side with a couple biscuits. Now when I get it set in position, a couple clamps will be necessary to hold it in place for about 20 minutes while the glue sets up. All right, that's good. Now yesterday you saw me get started on this project by working on the sides. I milled dados in for all the shelves and a rabbet along the back edge for the solid wood back that I'll put on later. Today I assembled the pieces using nails and glue just as I did with the lower cabinet. Then I applied a face frame that covers all the intersections. The face frame is made out of thin pine, 3/8 of an inch thick, and it has a bead detail on the edges. I'm using the same molding head cutter to mill the bead in the face frame pieces, except instead of holding the stock on edge, I'm holding it on the face. Now on the 3 shelves, I used a trim piece with a double bead. On the sides, I used a 1-inch wide piece with a single bead. And up at the very top, I have a 2 3/4 inch wide piece with a single bead, and then I've laid out this decorative cutout, which we'll do next. Now the face frame pieces are installed with a little bit of glue and some brads. Now the top gets attached to the base with a few screws. Now, just as with the original, our hutch has these center supports which slide into dados. Now I cut the supports on the bandsaw, sanded them smooth, and rounded over the edges with my router. A little glue and a couple nails hold them in place. Now let's install a couple cleats at the back of the cabinet to attach the end of the backboards. Now for the backboards. The first thing to do is mill a groove in one edge of each board. To do that, I'm using my stacked dado head cutter, which is set up for 1/4 of an inch in width, and I'm using this feather board to keep the stock tightly against the fence. Now with the feather board moved to the fence so it's pushing down and a couple adjustments to the fence, I can form the tongue that'll fit into that groove. Now using the same molding head cutter that I used to make the beads earlier, I'm putting a bead on the tongue edge of each board. Now to attach the boards to the back, I just slip them together and install 4-penny finish nails through the tongue side only into the shelves so that the boards are free to expand and contract. Well, now I'm beginning to form the cornice, which is going to wrap the upper portion of our cabinet. It starts out as a single solid piece of wood, and I make multiple profiles either with the router shaper or the table saw. Now a little work with the block plane to round some edges. Well, now I'm going to switch to a relatively new tool for us. It's a profile sander. Now this is an inline sander, so it goes back and forth rather than oscillate. And it's the perfect tool for a job like smoothing up our molding. Now to make the miters for my cornice molding, I've set up a long stop on my miter saw. And that allows me to position the molding correctly. I place the molding in upside down. This is the top of the molding against the stop. This is where it's going to meet the cabinet. It makes perfect miters every time. All right. Clean up this glue, and finally, we're ready for the finishing room. Well, for the last couple days, I've been working on the finish of our Irish Hutch, and I'm using something that's a very old-time finish. I started out by applying 2 coats of orange shellac. It's an alcohol-based material with a little bit of color in it, and it gives us this orange look. I sanded lightly between each coat, and when the shellac was dry, I just hand-wiped on a very light coat of satin polyurethane. Now, I've saved the top section of the base unit to show you a few of the steps. There are some defects in the top that I want to take care of, particularly these nail holes and where some of the wood has split out. Now, wood fillers have come a long way in the last few years. This manufacturer makes a wood filler that's a soft putty that I add a hardener to. And once it's mixed up, I can install it in the holes. The advantage of the new fillers is that they are flexible and they act as an adhesive, so they really stay put in the joint. Now, the manufacturer recommends that I let this dry about 20 minutes. Then I'll be able to sand it flush and start putting on the shellac. Well, now for the shellac. This is an alcohol-based product, so it dries very quickly. So I have to keep moving along and keep a wet edge. Now, it's important with this pine to use the orange shellac rather than white, because that's what gives it this great color. Well, as I was putting the finishing touches on this piece, the thought crossed my mind that this is going to get handed down to my children and their children, and even further than that. And what I've actually built here is a family heirloom. And even though it was a lot of hard work, when you think of it that way, it's very much worth it.